One of the great things about growing open-pollinated heirloom tomatoes is that you can grow your favorite varieties year after year without having to buy new seeds. Today I'll show you how to save true-to-type heirloom tomato seeds from this year's crop to grow in your garden next year. Heirlooms like this Cherokee Purple are old-time varieties whose seeds have been saved and passed down for years from generation to generation. All heirlooms are open-pollinated, which means that pollination occurs through natural mechanisms. And the seeds breed true to type as long as there's no cross-pollination between varieties. Fortunately, cross-pollination isn't an issue with most heirloom tomato varieties, and saved seeds will produce true to type, but I'll talk more about that in a moment. F1 hybrid tomato seeds, on the other hand, are created through controlled human intervention. Pollen from two carefully selected parents is crossed to produce specific desired characteristics in the hybrid. Unfortunately, saved seeds from hybrid tomatoes won't produce true to type. Instead, the plants will revert back to the parent varieties used to produce the hybrid. So saved seeds from these Sweet Million hybrid tomatoes might grow some very nice tomatoes, but they won't be Sweet Millions. To grow more Sweet Millions, I'll have to buy more seeds when they run out. Now let's get back to the topic of cross-pollination. There is some debate as to how much different tomato varieties cross. But according to Suzanne Ashworth in her book Seed to Seed, which I highly recommend, most modern tomato varieties have totally retracted styles. Such flower structures severely limit and may totally preclude any crossing between these varieties. To get a better understanding why, let's take a look at the anatomy of a tomato flower. Though there's some debate as to whether tomato flowers are technically self-pollinating, they do contain both male and female organs and are definitely self-fertile. All it takes is a little agitation from the wind, a bee, a bird, or a person to dislodge the grains of pollen on the inside of the anthers so they can attach to the stigma, travel down the style, and fertilize the seeds in the ovary. When the seeds are fertilized, the ovary then develops into a tomato. So why is cross-pollination not common in tomatoes? Because the style of most tomatoes is enclosed by the anthers. As a result, it's not likely that pollen from other varieties will enter the flower and attach to the stigma, even when bees and other pollinators travel from plant to plant. Though you don't have to worry about crossing between most tomato varieties, there are a few exceptions where crossing might be more likely. Again, according to Seed, 3 groups of tomato varieties have been found to have protruding styles: currant tomatoes, all of the potato leaf varieties, and any fruit form from double blossoms on beefsteak types. Because we didn't grow any of these 3 types of tomatoes this year, we didn't have to do anything to prevent cross-pollination between the more than 20 heirloom varieties that we did grow. We also could have grown 1 currant variety, 1 potato leaf variety, and 1 beefsteak without having to do anything to prevent cross-pollination. But if, for example, we had grown 2 currant tomato varieties or 2 potato leaf tomato varieties, we could have prevented cross-pollination simply by bagging the blossoms. Covering unopened tomato blossoms with a bag made from translucent, breathable, lightweight fabric will prevent cross-pollination in varieties with protruding styles. Though we didn't grow any of these varieties, I made a few blossom bags from Agribon row cover just for demonstration purposes. To make the bags, I cut the fabric to size, folded it over, and taped the open edges with packing tape. It's important to bag the blossoms before they open, in other words, before bees and other pollinators can pollinate them. After covering the blossoms, I secured the bags by tying them with garden tape. To encourage pollination, you can tap the bag every now and then to loosen the pollen from the inside of the anthers. When you see tomatoes developing, it's time to remove the bags. You can then mark which blossoms were bagged by tying a piece of gardening tape on the cluster stem. Again, this technique isn't needed unless you're growing more than 1 currant tomato variety, more than 1 potato leaf variety, or you want to save seeds from a beefsteak tomato produced by a double blossom. There's a link to a list of potato leaf varieties in the description below. Now let's talk about saving seeds. Heirloom tomato varieties can adapt to local growing conditions over time. So in choosing which plants to save seeds from, I select plants that have traits that I want to encourage in the future. I look for traits like taste, yield, and disease resistance. When possible, I also save seeds from more than 1 plant of each variety to maintain genetic diversity. After harvesting and washing ripe tomatoes, I save their seeds in a couple different ways. With larger tomatoes, I cut them across the middle, not from the stem to the blossom. This opens up the seed cavity and makes it easy to squeeze the seeds and the surrounding gel into a clean container. The gel contains chemicals that will inhibit seed germination while the seeds are wet. I could use the same approach with smaller tomatoes, but it's easier to throw them into a food processor, hit the pulse button a few times, add an equivalent amount of water, and pulse a few more times until blended. The seeds are hard enough that they won't be damaged. I then pour the contents into a clean container. I keep the containers on the counter for 2 to 3 days. During this time, the liquid will ferment. Fermentation removes the gel sacs and kills many seed-borne diseases. The fermentation process is stopped when the surface is covered with a layer of white or gray mold. If you wait too long after the top is covered with mold, the seeds may start to germinate. To separate out the seeds, I add more water to the container and stir. The good seeds settle to the bottom, while the hollow seeds, mold, and debris remain on top. I then pour off the material on top, leaving only a little liquid and the good seeds on the bottom. I pour the remaining liquid and seeds into a fine strainer and run water through it to remove remaining debris and clean the seeds. I then remove excess water from the strainer and dump the seeds on a glass or ceramic plate, or any plate or bowl covered with a coffee filter. I spread the seeds out on the plates and store them on a well-ventilated counter away from direct sun for 5 to 6 days to dry the seeds. To ensure the seeds dry evenly and don't clump together, I stir them at least once a day until they're dry. Once dry, the seeds are ready to store. The coffee filters make great storage containers with just a couple quick folds and a staple. I then place the seeds in sealed jars and store them in a cool, dry, dark cabinet. I hope you enjoyed this look at how we save tomato seeds. If you have any questions or comments on this topic, please let me know in a comment below. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please subscribe for more videos on how to grow a lot of food on a little land. Thanks, Oscar. Without spending much or working harder than you have to.